So it's back to school for many this week, but how many pupils and teachers will be missing due to having to isolate with COVID? The government's confirmed that pupils in Year 7 and above in England are joining those in other UK nations by having to wear face masks in class. The temporary reintroduction aims to address concerns about schools remaining open for face-to-face learning whilst COVID infection rates are high. Secondary schools have also been asked to provide on-site lateral flow testing ahead of when pupils return for the new term. Well, Damien McNulty is the executive member for Cheshire and Merseyside for the teaching union, the NASUWT. He's also a primary school teacher in Knowsley. Morning to you, Damien.
Good morning, Paul.
A happy New Year, if it's still... We can still say that, can't we, today, I think, anyway.
Of course we can. Happy New Year to you and your listeners.
Another tricky start to the year, though, for you and your colleagues, Damien.
Yes, certainly it is, and it does feel like a repeat of many New Years. We spoke this time last year, Paul, and it appears we're going to have a rerun of potentially what we did last year.
Yeah, looking at the situation at the moment, have things changed a lot since before Christmas to what's going to happen now? Children are going back this week.
No, I mean, effectively, there's been no change, as I'm sure you and your listeners will appreciate. Schools have been closed for the last 2 weeks, so there's been little they could do in preparation for the wider reopening today that many schools are undertaking, and government had little, if anything, in place by way of structure and process around lateral flow testing and on-site testing before the Christmas break.
Last term, we saw the reintroduction of masks for pupils in secondary schools when they were moving around the building. We've also seen the rollout of vaccinations for the over 12s. How much difference has that made, do you think?
Well, it certainly made a big difference. But in the run up to Christmas, public health colleagues were presenting data to all trade unions across Merseyside and Cheshire that showed that children in primary schools were 3 to 4 times more likely to have COVID-19 than any other age group in the population.
What slightly confuses me is there's different rules for primary schools and secondary schools. Now, I know you've obviously got to take age into account, but are we rather forgetting about primary schools in all of this?
Yeah. I think in many ways we are, and of course the government guidance hasn't changed. If any child under the age of 18, whether they've had a vaccine or not, is in a household that has a positive case of COVID-19, those children are able to attend school. And we know with the transmission, not just of the previous variant, but the now dominant variant Omicron, that the transmission is extremely rife. And consequently, that will spread across other classrooms and into other households. And we see that already with shortages of NHS staff, of train and bus drivers, and in other services as well, even before schools reopen today.
How important is ventilation, do you think? I mean, we've one of the things that the government has said will be improved in schools is the ventilation. How much progress has been made on that?
Many schools and many school leaders have taken a fantastic approach to ventilation over the last 12 months. But sadly, of the 350,000 CO2 monitors that the government promised in September 21, many of those monitors still haven't arrived in schools, or unfortunately, in some cases, they're sat under desks and in cupboards not being used. Ventilation is key, but of course, as we wake up this morning to much cooler temperatures than we've had, human nature will want to keep windows closed in schools to preserve a reasonable temperature for staff and for children to work in.
One of the things that The Guardian reported on yesterday, which I saw, was the government telling head teachers to start preparing for staff shortages, which obviously it's going to be an issue. It's an issue in every industry, isn't it? But maybe you support staff as fill-in teachers or combine classes. So, maybe we might end up with bigger classes. What is the ideal way around this, do you think?
I don't think there is any ideal solution. Certainly in the run-up again to Christmas, through the autumn term, attendance of staff and children has been the most the most challenging throughout the almost 2 years of the pandemic. Supply teachers, relief teachers have been extremely difficult to find because they're thin on the ground for a range of reasons, much of which is to do with poor paying conditions of service with a number of those agencies, but also in relation to the wider point around larger class sizes. It's definitely not the answer. I mean, first of all, there are the needs of all of the children to take into account. Some of those children will undoubtedly have special needs, potentially medical needs. The teachers who don't normally teach those children won't have that support or information to hand. Larger class sizes would imply increased numbers of people in a small space, which will present a huge problem around the current plans and understanding in any school about ventilation and what's effective ventilation.
On the point about masks, there has been quite a lot of concern expressed about masks and whether they actually are particularly effective in educational settings. And there's also been people, the National Children's Deaf Society has tweeted about their reservations about mask policy. Is it really the answer to make children wear masks in classrooms, do you think?
It's certainly part of a range of measures, and there have been a number of randomized studies undertaken, which were also reported across various media sources yesterday, specifically around the use of masks in schools, and that science is very clear. However, the Deaf Society are right to point out that there are a number of children and other adults in school environments that will be potentially adversely impacted. But of course, there are different types of masks that can be used with clear face panels for any children or staff that have those particular needs.
There's been a call for retired teachers, Damien, to come back and help out in the profession, rather, if there are gaps in staffing. How realistic is that? Can you see lots of retired teachers getting up this morning thinking, right, I'm going to get back to it, I want to go back into teaching, I need to help out?
Well, again, I think there will be a number of teachers that hear that call to arms, and retired teachers who do think absolutely I'll do that. But let's be clear: nationally, the government have missed their recruitment target for new teachers to the profession, just to replace those that are leaving for the last 8 years in a row. Spectacularly missed it by tens of thousands of teachers, and we've also got to ask ourselves why so many teachers take early retirement and have left the profession because of workload pressures and because of fundamentally a system that's not been effectively funded for at least the last decade.
The testing, I know my daughter goes to high school and they're doing a lot of testing at her high school this week. That's putting a lot of pressure on schools, isn't it, to try and get all this testing done at a time where there doesn't seem to be many tests?
There is. The Secretary of State, in fairness, yesterday did announce that there were separate supply routes for lateral flow tests into secondary schools. But of course, this is something that the government shouldn't be talking about on the eve of schools reopening. It should have had these plans in place well before schools closed at Christmas time. There's a certain inevitability, and this is the third, if not fourth time where we've had a comparable return after a prolonged break where there's been an increase in transmission just before the schools have broken up. Government doesn't seem to learn the lessons that it's been presented with by its own shortcomings in previous situations. And again, let's be clear. What the NSUWT are calling for is on-site testing provision that isn't run or managed by schools, that is provided by and resourced properly so that school leaders and school teachers and the school workforce can focus on their core job. I mean, heaven forbid that we have 25% absences, which the government are telling us to plan for. This isn't just about teachers in school. It's about site managers, it's about cleaners, it's about cooks and all the essential support staff that provide the infrastructure and the day in, day out support to allow schools to function. You wouldn't need a significant amount of essential and key support staff to be absent for a school to not be able to run safely or function properly.
And that's the big fear, isn't it? I'm sure teachers fear it. I'm damn sure that parents, are really worried about schools having to close again. Nobody wants to see a return to children being taught at home, do they?
It's the absolute last thing that NASUWT want to see. our members tell us very clearly they want to be in their classrooms working with the children that they're responsible for teaching in a safe environment. They know that's the best place for the children. They know that's the place where they can make the most impact on the raising standards for children in terms of their life chances in forthcoming exams and in studies that the children are engaged in, whichever age and stage of education they're at.
As always, nice speaking with you, Damien. One day we'll have a conversation about something else, maybe. Thank you very much for joining me.
Indeed.